Hi, my name's Tim Taylor. I'm the series producer and creator of Teatime. I'm here to talk about our new exciting project called Dig Village. I always feel that we're incredibly lucky in Britain to have the OS maps.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in some countries where it's really quite difficult to sort maps out, and Britain seems to have, from a very early stage, got the idea that a map is quite a nice, useful thing, and that's grist to your mill, really.
Well,
isn't
it is. Yeah, I mean, Major General Roy was the founder of the Ordnance Survey,
Right.
and what's really satisfying about this is going back to the 18th century, to Jacobite rebellions. And he recognised the need for maps. If you're going to fight the Scots, you need to know where they are and how to move your troops about. And from his initiative and patronage of George III and the various other people at the time, he promoted the making of an Ordnance Survey map, you know, the Ordnance, the Army Connection.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about Major General Roy was he was an antiquarian.
Right.
So he was making these maps to pacify the Scots and all the rest of it, but wherever he went, if he found a Roman camp, he drew it on. And so
What date was that, Stewart?
This is mid 1800s, 1745, that sort of period. And so some of the earliest maps ever made are actually made by somebody who does what I do now, a map maker with a massive interest in what the archaeology was.
Stewart's day job really is as a surveyor and a kind of for English heritage, to go out there and map the monuments. Would that be
and the correct title, surveyor implies measuring. I think it always does, whereas what I do is analysis of information. It's like a police detective. You've got all these clues.
Right.
It's piecing the clues together.
Right.
So the maps, you've got the ground, aerial photos, excavation.
It's sort of map maker meets cracker.
Yeah, I like that.
I think he likes that. What's been the most sort of exciting map you've found from an early period that sort of has clinched a particular pattern in the landscape for you?
Whoa, that's a question and a half, that one.
Yeah, we're good at that.
Actually, on one of the Time Team programmes we did years ago at Castle Howard, there was a map there which was made by, I think it was Hawksmoor, the architect, which actually just shows the point at which the old castle was still there but being demolished, because there was a medieval village at Castle Howard before that big grand Vanbrugh house was placed there.
Yes.
And the map was made just at the point when the streets of the village were still there but the houses had gone. The old castle was still there but was probably by then just a builder's yard effectively, just before it's all swept away by the building of the Vanbrugh house. And that map allowed us to work out where the churchyard was, where the main streets of the village was. And that map really was that it's a kind of point in time thing with a map. A map's made at a point in time for a purpose. And I think when you find a map that says at that point, at that year, this is what was going on, I think that's the sort of thing I find gives me that kind of buzz when you find something. I mean, there's hundreds of examples where you find.
Well, we've only got time for the one.
Have you? Oh, I could go on forever.
No.
Then the second stage, I think, is always to go and get the tithe map out. These are maps compiled in the well, as a result of the 1835 Tithe Commutation Act. So the maps are all about 1840, and they are the first large-scale detailed maps that covers most of the country.
And where would you get them from?
And they are usually in the county record office of the historic counties.
And the tithe map will have that interesting thing of being both a map and an apportionment.
Yeah, the award, which tells you the landowners, the tenants, the areas of the field and what's been grown at the time, and most importantly for local research, it gives you the field name. And often that is the first time we hear of the name of fields, and often it's the name that the farmers still use. You know, it might be 200 years old now, nearly 200 years old, but often that name goes back hundreds of years before that. you'd be reasonably lucky if there was an 18th century map of all or part of parish, perhaps done for a big estate. You know, a big estate landowner has his land surveyed. So if you get a map of 1750, 1780, that can be fantastically useful. If you're really, really lucky, there'll be a map in the 1600s. I mean, for example, if your parish or village or local area was owned by an Oxford or Cambridge college, then there might even be a map back to the 1500s, and that's absolutely fantastic if you get that.
That's 1500. Is that really quite early for a map?
It is. Once you get into the 16th century,
Yes.
map making is now becoming more common. At the early part of the 1500s, it's less common. There's not many maps that period. There are one or two late 15th century maps, but by the 16th century, people are using maps to show what they own, where things are.
And that's why a rich chap like Sir Ralph Agas, whatever his name is, actually had that. What's the purpose of this to him? This is what he owns, is it?
They tend to be, yeah, they tend to be ownership maps. I mean, it's the first time really maps are used to say, hey, look, this is what I've got. This is my land. And
a bit like Doomsday in a sense.
It is, yeah. The big landowners want to. They want to know what they've got. You know, this is a Renaissance period we're talking about. This sudden comprehension that people have land and ownership of landscape, even, and so it goes from you being very wealthy and just wanting a map to see how rich and powerful you are, and how much land you've got, to actually people starting to want to think about, well, what can we do on this land? By the time you get to about 1860, the Ordnance Survey are producing, in fact, this type of map, which is a large-scale map which shows a smaller area but a lot more detail.
And you get these off the web now?
You can get these off the web, yeah.
Landmark. This is this one,
yeah.
and for your area you can get an 1884, this one, published 84, you can get that off the web.
Yeah, you can indeed. I mean, the dates vary depending on whether we're mapping, but this is the first accurate map that shows all the buildings, all the paths, all the field boundaries and so on, and you can actually take measurements from these because they're accurate.
Because the Ordnance Survey, who begin work in the early 1800s, they start to produce really large-scale detailed maps, and the best series of all are really those done in the 1880s, so 1885, 1886, something like that, which are done at both 25 inch to the mile and reduced to 6 inch to the mile, which is roughly 1 to 10,000, and they are superb maps. I still think they're the best maps the Ordnance Survey have ever produced because they're so detailed. They actually give individual trees in some cases and individual little houses, and then there's a run from then on. They come in 1903, there's a second edition, the 1930s there's an edition, and if you get that combined with the tithe map and any other earlier map, then you start to see the later changes in the landscape. The real skill is to take your earliest map, produce it at something like 1 to 10,000, 1 to 25,000, and then leap backwards and try and draw yourself a map of 1500, 1200, 800. I recommend glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon to do this because it sort of helps the thinking process.
And I remember seeing you with sheets of tracing paper.
Oh yeah, well I'm very old-fashioned, Tim.
No, but you got your tracing paper, you'd drawn the roads from the earlier map, and then the same scale, and then you dropped them over the modern map so you could sort of see some of those early patterns.
Yeah, well it's that business about when you take a photograph, you don't see the detail. If you paint it or sketch it, you do. And the same applies to this sort of work. If you get a computer program to adjust the maps, you don't see the detail. If you laboriously copy one map to another one, in other words, you start with a modern map, you put a piece of tracing paper out and you copy the 1887 map.
And you call this regressive
map analysis.
Regressive map analysis.
But there always has to be the glass of Cabernet Sauvignon to the right hand side. Mick? 2 glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon up, 1 map.
Thank you very much.